What books inspire you? This is the IssuesWatch podcast. Hi, I'm Don Meyer, Chief Growth Officer at the New Jersey Society of CPAs, and welcome to the IssuesWatch podcast. I'm excited today to spotlight something that has really energized our emerging leaders community, our virtual book club. Over the past 5 months, participants met to explore 3 powerful titles: Greenlights by Matthew McConaughey, The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel, and The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday. Each book sparked its own set of reflections on opportunity, mindset, financial behavior, and resilience, topics that sit at the heart of leadership and career growth. Joining me today are the 3 NJCPA members who guided these conversations. Matt Mojica, Associate Manager of Financial Reporting at Prudential. Welcome, Matt.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
Great. Brandon Ventura, Chief Financial Officer and Head of Tax Strategy at Trillium Wealth. Welcome, Brandon.
Thanks for having me, Don.
And Lexi Wilson, Senior Manager at Bowman & Company. Welcome, Lexi.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Right. Now, you've done this before, so you're gonna have to,
We're the rookies here.
That's right. Yeah.
I'll try.
Yeah. So let's jump in. First, Matt, what inspired you to choose these 3 books for the Emerging Leaders Book Club?
I think with these books, they are all, I guess Greenlights first. That's one of the biggest autobiographies of the last 10 years. He is such a dynamic writer. Everyone knows him. He's an A-list celebrity, household name.
So, of course, we're talking about Matthew McConaughey, Renaissance man.
Yep, Renaissance man, rom-com star,
Yep.
and some of my favorite movies. I love Interstellar. It just seemed like an all-around interesting guy. Psychology of Money. We're all CPAs. I think it's important that we picked a book, especially with such like emerging leaders and young professionals, that really talks about why we make the decisions that we do when we're thinking about money, especially so early in our careers and also our own personal lives. And then The Obstacle is the Way. I think the title says it all. We are in a difficult profession, a challenging but also an exciting profession. And I think just being able to shift your mindset, which is one of the big themes of the book, is definitely something that we thought would be valuable for the readers.
Brandon or Lexi, were there particular themes in the books that you thought would really connect with your fellow emerging leaders?
Yeah, so when we were choosing the books, the idea was, especially with Greenlights to start, that was a little bit more of a memoir and like some personal stories from McConaughey, so it was a nice way to start the year and be kind of engaging, but also like a lot of lessons that he learned throughout his life, which were good for improving his mindset. And that's kind of the focus on that first book was like mindset, right? Like getting the mindset right is such a huge part of any career, especially ours. And then the Psychology of Money by Housel. I know the title is Psychology of Money, but I was like pleasantly surprised to find out that it was more than just like money itself. It was about like success and like what makes people successful and what makes people happy, which I think is another huge part of anyone's career, is to find out, okay, as a human being, what is going to make me happy and like what makes other human beings more successful than others. So I think that was a really good second book. And then the last book with The Obstacle is the Way, I thought that was a good way to end the year, right? Mm-hmm. Going into the holiday season, once we come out of the holiday season, at least a lot of us CPAs are very, busy and in one of the harder cycles of our job coming out of that. So I think a book on dealing with adversity and dealing with, setbacks and maybe feeling like you're behind would be a good book to end the year on.
How would you kind of classify these 3 books? Do they kind of fall into that category of like self-help, or is it personal development? How would you kind of classify that? If I walked into a bookstore and I was looking for a different category, where do you think I would find these books?
I like to call them self-improvement. Now, I know a lot of like the term self-help gets thrown around a lot, and I think when people hear that, some people might get defensive, like, oh, I don't need any help, so I like to think of them as self-improvement. So that's where I think at least like the second 2 of the 3 would be. Greenlights, I think, also falls in that, but it's also like a memoir for McConaughey.
Right.
What do you think, Lexi?
I agree. I think each book is about a different aspect of leadership and personal development, and I think they do work together really well. I think Greenlights mostly is about perspective, resilience, and I think it's really cool to see that leadership paths aren't necessarily linear, and there's so many different facets of it. That's also why I liked about The Psychology of Money, because I, like you, thought it was just going to be about money, and I think it's a lot more about intentional decision making, which is really important. And And that's why I think everyone, whether you attended one session or each session, you walked away with a different perspective, but they all work together to kind of help you develop your personal growth, whether that's personally or also, in work. And I think they all work together to navigate uncertainty. And that's why I think, it was a really important book choice. And I think they all work together really well.
Well, I think that word you said, uncertainty. I mean, I would think for emerging leaders, you're still relatively new in your careers. You're all established, but there's a lot of uncertainty for the rest of your careers. You're not sure what's going to happen in the next 10, 15, 20 years. Was that something that you were thinking about as you chose these books, or something that you think kind of came about as you were reading them, where you realized that all of these had sort of that central theme about dealing with uncertainty?
I read the Matthew McConaughey book before we picked it for the book club, and I thought one of the more interesting parts of that was his pivot, where he was doing rom-coms. He was the rom-com guy. You couldn't go to a movie theater in the early 2000s without seeing his face. Right. And he wanted to start doing more serious work. He was uncertain. He stopped taking roles, and he made those hard decisions that allowed him to pave the way to be in Wolf of Wall Street, Interstellar, some of these roles that really, Dallas Buyers Club?
Yes, that was it.
Dallas Buyers Club.
Right.
And the uncertainty for a while when he was in the forest, when he was not sure, like, I'm not going to get roles anymore because I'm not accepting these rom-com roles and people aren't ready to give me this more professional, established, like, drama series roles. That was a moment of uncertainty for him. And I think, like, as young professionals, especially like on the path I took, there was some uncertainty when I was trying to decide, am I going to stay in public? Am I going to move to private? And I think that's a decision that a lot of people make early into their career. And I think that's why this book resonated with so many people during the book club.
Yeah. And what's interesting, I mean, the first movie I remember Matthew McConaughey is, and I'm showing my age here, was Dazed and Confused. And I think that's actually where the all right came from. I think that's the movie he introduced it. But what's interesting about that is how intentional he was about his decisions. About he didn't let his career he didn't fall into things. He intentionally decided, what direction he was going to take his career, and I think that's critically important for any emerging leader and certainly any young professional. So, Lexi, that's an insight that kind of stood out to me. What other insights stood out to you about the three books?
I would say my biggest takeaway kind of from all the books is kind of realizing that things aren't happening to you, they're happening for you. And I think being able to kind of take that step back and realize your role in decision making and your ability to be proactive and intentional in making that decision, and not necessarily because it's a setback, it's going to ruin your whole career. It could just be a step forward that is pushing you to take that step forward.
Right. And sometimes something happens, you think it's the end of the world, and it turns out to be the best thing for you. It's that push that you needed, that you didn't know you needed necessarily. What about Matt, Brendan? What were the aha moments for you when you read these books?
So, building off of that, right, like the uncertainty and like how it's just prevalent today, right? No matter how long you are in a career, no matter how safe you feel in a career, you never know, if you could be laid off or if the industry takes like a downturn. So, in the Obstacle is the Way, there was a part of the book where he was talking about how astronauts, when they were being trained to go into space, the one thing that they actually trained the most was their ability to like stay calm in a hectic situation. You have these engineers, these astronauts that are super smart, have all these skills, right? But they're focused on like almost like the soft skill of being able to stay calm in a hectic situation. And there's like another term that I like that I kind of focus on. Like after I read that, I did more research and I was like, that's really interesting. It's called equanimity, right? Which is the ability to stay calm in like a time of chaos, right? And I just think that skill is probably one of the best skills that like anyone can build, whether you're a CPA or attorney, whatever career you're in. Having that skill where you're able to stay calm under chaos or like what seems to be a hectic situation, it seems like, doom is impending. Like being able to stay calm allows you to make the right objective decision. If you get overwhelmed by your emotions, then you tend to, make bad decisions, I think. And the greatest thing about that is that I think it's a skill that you can build, just like anything else. When you're in a tough situation, if you consciously can think about, hey, let me stay calm, let me think about the best situation, let me not let my emotions take me over, it's something that you can build.
So, Matt, how about you? Any aha moments from the books?
I think when Matthew McConaughey, he goes to Australia, and he was doing a exchange program. And he's like, I'm going to be in Sydney. This is going to be exciting. I'm in one of the coolest cities across the world from where I grew up in Texas. And he's driving out there. And he lands in the Sydney airport. He keeps driving another few hours. And he's like, oh, I guess we're going to this like mid-sized town. Nope, we don't like those mid-sized towns. They keep on going. Small town, maybe like 500 people. Oh, this is a little small, but I could still make it work. He keeps going in. He ends up in a town with maybe like 80-something people in it. Wow. And just being able to, like Brandon said, being able to pivot, to be able to stay positive in a situation like that. I think that was one of those aha moments, because how many of us can stay strong when we're like, we're going to have to spend a year in this small town in the middle of Australia and make it work? And I think he lasted almost 200 days in this house with like the weirdest foster family in the entire world. So I do have to say, like, that was one of those aha moments, being able to pivot, being able to adjust to situations and just kind of go with the flow when life's happening.
Right. Well, these days being able to go with the flow, that's again critical, not just for your professional life, but also for your personal life as well. So Brandon, back to you. So each book approaches growth from a different angle, mindset, money, resilience. How do you see these themes intersecting?
Well, I think they're all very important themes. Like I said before, for CPAs definitely, and I just think for anyone in life, right? You're always going to need the technical skills for your career and job, but these are also very important. Like mindset is just pervasive to all areas of your life, right? So you have to get in the mindset first, right, to be able to do anything, to be able to do your job. You have to have the right mindset. And then the second part with the psychology of money, right? And again, I know the title is Psychology of Money, but it really was like the psychology of like success and what makes people, advance in life, what makes people happy, which I think is really big too, right? Because at the end of the day, like, happiness is success, right? If you're successful but you're not happy, are you really successful? Right. So, and then like for example, one of the things in the psychology of money was like, I think the quote was like, doing something you love but on a schedule that you can't control can turn into something that you hate, right?
Yeah,
so,
right.
And I thought that was a really, really good point. And what stood out to me about that was that, people need to feel like they can make an impact. They need to feel like they have some level of autonomy and some level of being able to do things their way. So I think it's important to understand that about ourselves, that when we're working, we need that, that autonomy and that leeway to do things our way. And then also, if you have people working for you, someone new that's coming into the workforce, as we grow in our careers, we're going to have subordinates and people working for us. It's important to let them, have their way to do things, to think through things. So I think that was a big part of the psychology of money, which I think, again, is more than just money. And then the last one, like the obstacle being the way, that's another soft skill that I think is critical, right, is being able to persevere in tough times. And the takeaway from that book for me was, Nick Saban, right, Alabama head football coach, won all the titles, probably the most winningest coach in college football history. Even with all the talent that they had and the history that they had, he was focused on what do we need to do today?
Right.
What do we need to do at practice today? Did we all eat right? Like the diets of the players, like let's make sure we eat our meals today. Let's make sure we go to the weight room. He's just focused on the process, like the everyday process, and that's what got them to those big championships and those big goals. So when you're in tough times, right, the obstacle is the way. You're in a tough time. I think the best way out of that is to really just like hone in on the process, like the daily, even go down to the daily process and just focus on what do I need to do today. Right. And then the next thing you know, weeks, months, and years have passed, and you've gotten to where you need to be, but not because you thought about like the end goal, but because you were focusing on what you needed to do each day. Right. So I think those are all really good themes that I hope the people that attended the book club, if you were to come to each of these, you would have gotten a little piece of that, and could kind of understand like how important that is, even if it's just one nugget from each of those books. That can maybe inspire people to go further down those paths and further develop those skills.
So as you're talking, I'm hearing a lot of sort of common themes that we're hearing from this next generation of accountants. You've all gotten old enough where we're talking about the generation after, but we're talking about the pipeline and how do we encourage people to, or more students to go into accounting, and things like purpose. They want purpose to their work. They don't want to just come and be just part of the grind. But the other idea of autonomy, I think, is another big picture message that it sounds like came out of these books. Matt or Lexi, I mean, were there sort of big picture messages that you think would be valuable for all emerging leaders, or even, like I said, the next generation, those coming out of school, things that you took away that I think would be valuable for them?
I liked what Brandon said about process, especially with
Yeah.
Nick Saban, because there's so many things that we can't control in our lives. When we're driving to work, we can't control that person that decides to cut us off, or that truck that won't let us in, or that coworker that won't send you that one file that you're begging them to send you, and then they'll send it at 5 p.m. But you can control the little habits that you have, making sure you log in early, making sure that you have a set schedule, maybe even a set time that you check those emails, being able to say, I'm taking my lunch break every single day at 12 and I'm walking my dog Gracie at 12:30 at this
Right,
time.
right.
Being able to have those like little habits that you can control will make your life so much better and build that resilience gene that when things go really off like haywall, then you'll be able to pivot for that. Because if you can't control the little things in your life and the small things that either bring you happiness or bring some control in your life, then when things get a little crazy, then it could go downhill from there.
Right. And I think that type of control then kind of feels like autonomy.
Yeah.
You know, you don't feel like you're being told what to do. Even those little things, because you can control them, you're like, oh, okay, well, I'm making my own decisions.
Yeah.
And I'm leading my own career. So, Lexi, I'm going to kind of maybe repurpose the question. Can you share an example of how you applied an idea from the book in your work or personal life?
I would say my biggest thing, kind of pivoting off of what Matt and Brandon said, is controlling what you can control and trying not to stress about things that you can't control. That's always been a little bit of a struggle for me because I do try and control everything and make sure I know every possible outcome that could happen. And a lot of that I've been taking into my management and leadership style is by helping, my staff realize that there's only so much things that they can control and not to worry about it. And I think it helps them if I'm a little more calm. And kind of taking a step back, if things look like there's going to be a bad setback, we can kind of take a step back, take a deep breath, and reevaluate. And I think if I do that, that helps my staff do that, which also helps my clients do that. So that's probably the biggest thing, and I think it's allowed me to be a lot more productive than I was before, when I think I would spend a couple hours being like, Chicken Little, nervous about the impending doom that never actually happened. So.
Yeah. Well, obviously, since the pandemic, there's been a lot of talk about mental health, and I think one of the things that comes up all the time is exactly what you just said. Don't worry about things you can't control, but we all do it.
Yeah.
We all do it, and I think what's lacking sometimes is that moment when you go, wait a minute, I don't have control over this. I need to stop worrying about it, and I need to move on. So, Brandon, how about you? What is there something you took from the book that you've applied to your personal life or your work life?
So I've applied in a way, with the obstacles, the way there was one section is called like the seduction of pessimism, right? And what the idea is that when something bad happens, like or a setback happens, it's like right in your face, right in that moment. It's very easy to like, take that to heart and like let that bring you down. But the progress, right, and the good things that happen, they often happen like very slowly over time. You almost don't even realize it, right? Because it's going well. Like there's no reason. There's no like impact or moment that makes you like think about that. So what I try to do now is like, when a year passes by at a new job or a new role, I kind of like to look back at what I was doing a year ago and like what I'm doing now, and just seeing like the progress. Like, oh, like this, this is something that when I was doing a year ago, I had no idea how to do. It was very challenging and difficult to me. Now, that's almost very easy to me, and now I'm doing this and that. So like kind of like making sure that you're like measuring your success and your growth, like almost like celebrating wins in a way, because
And celebrating small wins,
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
just the big wins, not
Right.
just the
Yeah.
obvious ones, but small ones. Yeah,
exactly, because it's very easy to go unnoticed. So because like I said, the setbacks, usually it's an exact moment or incident that happens that makes you realize, and it's right in your face. But for me, it's kind of like reflecting on and realizing that, oh, like I've grown too, and I've had a lot of wins as well. I think that's important. Like what you were saying about like mental health, it's a big problem these days. Like I think that can really help too, is also looking at like the good and not just, again, like the seduction of pessimism. It's very easy to look at the bad, especially when it's a big thing that happens and you can't avoid it. You have to look it right in the face. So.
Right. And let's face it, we're human. Pessimism is an out, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you're pessimistic about something, that gives you an excuse not to do something. So,
Right.
yeah, I think that's a great way of putting it. Is trying to look at things incrementally, take small steps, celebrate those small victories, so that because pessimism is so easy, it's so easy for it to creep in. Yeah,
There's a quote. I have a little notes app that whenever I'm listening to like a podcast or reading a book, I'll like jot something down, and I'm gonna butcher it, but it's something about like pessimism being equivalent to like ignorance and stupidity, because you're making the assumption that you already know what's going to happen and that it's going to be negative.
right.
So it's just one of those things that I always think, if I'm ever feeling down, if I'm like, this sucks, like this is going bad, I'm like, wait, how do I know this is going to be bad or be worse? And that kind of shifting your perception, which I guess is kind of related to obstacles the way, follows that same principle in that sense.
Right, right.
Yeah, and I think being a pessimist, I tend to do that a lot, and I think I've realized that it's okay to want something. And I think for a couple years ago when I was studying for exams, you almost acted like, oh, I probably failed that anyway, because it made you feel better if you did fail.
Right.
And I've kind of realized that now, that it's okay to want something, and it's okay to fail at that thing if I didn't get it this time. And I think that's been really hard for me to realize, but I think it's been helpful, and I think it's made me a lot happier since being able to understand that.
Yeah, what I find interesting is that over the last probably 10, 15 years, there's been so much talk about, from a business perspective, don't be afraid of failure. In fact, fail intentionally, just make sure and learn something. But yet, I think the fear of failure, I feel like, is worse than it's ever been. Like, people are just, and maybe it's because they're afraid it's going to be exposed on social media, or, it's going to go beyond sort of the small circle that they're in. But I think that's a great point. I mean, that idea of getting over that fear of failure that turns into pessimism, and then you basically just bail on everything.
Yeah.
I think that's a great point. So Matt, let's go back to the book club. How do you see? It sounds like the first year was a huge success.
It was a lot of fun. Yeah.
How do you see it evolving over time? Like maybe advance in sort of like a reading rainbow type of thing. You could come in and read excerpts from the book or something like that to other emerging leaders.
One thing that I definitely want in the future is I want to introduce some some fiction books into it. I'd love to do an in-person element to this. I know me and Lexi were talking maybe like a few months ago. Lexi sent me this TikTok, and it was like all these different games you can play in an in-person book club where you have a dice and you roll it, and that's the question you're going to ask. So I think something like a more in-person element, I think now that we're a few years behind the pandemic, people are really craving that like in-person element and having conversations and growing and like having deep conversations. So I think that's one thing I would definitely look forward to, like an in-person element to it, maybe mixing in some fiction in there. I think I said this in the last book club, fiction is the fake that tells the truth. I don't know if that's the exact, I probably butchered it, but I probably butchered a few quotes today, but definitely something along those lines where I want stories that like excite people, that may be something a little bit different from what they're reading on the day-to-day basis. I feel like a lot of accountants that I've talked to, a lot of CPAs, they're reading those self-improvement books, those biographies. But I do think like maybe throwing a fantasy book in there could be fun. You can learn something. Some of the best books I've read are some of the ones that I would have never picked up 5 years ago at this point. So just widening the range there and expanding points of views.
Okay. Are you looking for recommendations?
We're always open to
Yeah.
recommendations.
Okay. Well, I was talking to someone yesterday, one of my favorite books, because I'm a huge baseball fan, but I also think this is a very good business book, is Moneyball.
Oh, great.
I think the message from that book, even though the book has got to be at least 15 years old, maybe more, I think it still resonates today. So that would be my recommendation. Maybe it's a spring read, as baseball.
Did you ever
starting
read The
up again.
Natural?
No. I
That's
know
a
it's
great
very
one.
different than the movie, though.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Well, it's a lot darker.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Roy Hobbs doesn't hit Roy Hobbs strikes out on purpose in the book. Yeah. But Barry Levinson couldn't have that in the movie.
Yeah, you got to have your
Wouldn't have worked
blockbuster. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I think in what was it, Pretty Woman, I think the original script, Richard Gere and Julia Roberts didn't get together either.
Really?
So no. But you gotta make it optimistic.
Yeah.
The whole thing about pessimism, we gotta give people hope. So, well, this is great. This was a great discussion. We'll have to have you back next year to talk about 3 new books.
Thank you.
So Matt, Brandon, Lexi, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks
for having us.
And thank you for listening or watching. Visit the links in the show notes to learn about the NJCPA's Emerging Leaders activities and to access career development articles and resources.